This is a production of Cornell University.
Yep, everybody's in.
Okay.
So for our live audience, welcome to the fourth episode this year, the Cornell Turf Show, fastest 30 minutes in turf. Happy again to have Rich Buckley, director of the Plant Diagnostic Lab at Rutgers. Rich was on with us yesterday for episode 3, our golf audience. Happy to chat with Rich today about early season diseases on lawn areas and some common problems we might notice. So for our live audience, fill out that poll there. We'll close that in a little bit. But as always, we'll start with Frank. Beautiful sunny morning in most of the Northeast, Frank, where things are kind of looking up. And as always, you start us off on a little bit of a light note, usually. Got anything interesting, fun from social media for us today?
Honestly, Carl, I'm all business today, unfortunately.
Business.
And part of it is because it's still damn cold. I was out there doing chores this morning. And it was in the 20s, everything's frozen. And so it's been a interesting start to the year, and I just assume get into the weather, but I'm sort of wondering what we're seeing in the poll already this morning. Do we know where everyone's from?
Yeah, so I'll just close it up here, and it looks like about a third of the audience, school grounds and fields.
Mm-hmm.
Some educators in there, 22%. One person from a municipality, and then a couple others in there. So probably a combination of those three.
All right. Well, this is we're doing lawn and grounds every other week with sports, and golf happens every week because those guys are nutty. and they want to hear from us every week, and it's a incredibly intensive management system, and of course sports is as well, and certain lawns can be, and certainly if you're in the institutional grounds business like our brother here at Cornell, Dan Scheid, all about when you have to do things at a fairly large scale, as you do in the background here at the Greenwood Cemetery. So listen, let's talk about the winter. I get to chat about the weather with a lot of different people and present the weather in a lot of different ways. And sometimes, and it gets curated over a period of time as you wrap up and get into the growing season. And this has certainly been a warmer than normal winter. Now, again, I think, Carl, we asked folks this last week, and a lot of people said they thought it felt cool, or maybe they felt it felt normal. But this was slightly above average when looking at the entire course of the winter. Now, what's interesting is we're already starting to see some drought. We went into the winter with a bit of drought, and it looks like we're already coming out in some places, particularly here along southern New England, the coast of New England. We have a lot of contact with our colleague Victoria Wallace at the University of Connecticut, who talks a lot about how dry it's been out there for a number of years now. Southeastern New England has really hit it on the chin the last several years with regard to drought. Now, the interesting thing about the winter, when you look at a national perspective, and again, I talked about this with the golf folks last week a little bit, we had a lot of snow cover across the entire United States. Lots of concern about places where we're trying to grow warm season grasses in these regions of the central United States. But up here, we had a lot of persistent snow cover. But when you actually look at the moisture, and this is the funny thing, you sort of know where you are. If you look where I live, we live here, Carl, in central New York. It was a fairly wet winter on the whole, certainly slightly above average. Rich has been wet now for several years. I think Rich is starting to believe he lives in a rainforest or something, but there certainly were plenty of wet areas down here in Jersey, and throughout the Northeast, again, fairly dry. It was a fairly dry winter, even in New England and in Western New York, especially up along the lake in Rochester. So what's coming? Well, looks like a swath of moisture's coming through. This is not good in some ways for any place that's going to get a lot of traffic, even trying to get work done when the soil's wet from the rainfall that's expected. And I just love that there's this 2-inch rainfall plus right where Rich is. So we'll have plenty of time to talk about what the cool wet weather is going to bring. So degree days so far as we accumulate them, this is a good tracking for insects and weeds. We use phenology a lot. We'll talk a little bit more about phenology, phenological indicators, when plants are blooming and when things like pests can coincide with the plant bloom. Obviously, we do that for forsythia bloom and crabgrass stuff and insect stuff. So as you can see, not a lot of base 50 growing degree days. We're still down fairly low and not many expected. Now, the 8 to 14 day forecast for much of the Northeast is above normal. I'll show you a map in a minute that says we're expected to have above normal temperatures next week, but at least from a degree day perspective, above 50 degree day perspective, we do not expect to accumulate a lot next week. Now, just to remind everybody about, again, out mowing and doing stuff, I know we're pent up to want to get out there, but growth potential, even when, we're barely making average temperatures of 50 degrees, that means the greatest a grass could possibly grow is 20% of full potential. So obviously, we want to be careful. Now, some of this is because of the fall spring, or as the fool spring in some cases. I don't know how many people knew this. I should have brought this up with Art the other day, but New York actually has 12 seasons that includes this fool spring. And you can see this is what happened in early March, just last week, where we had 60-degree temperatures. And we still are, I was out today, it was in the teens. And so when you look at the National Phenology Network that looks at flowering plants, this is the spring leaf index, sort of how trees and plants are leafing out. Like the dark red is where you're about 20 days ahead, plus or minus, and the blue zone is where you're about 20 days behind. Now, up until just a few days ago, we hadn't really leafed out very much at all. So we want to be careful not to jump the gun here again, much like what we talked to you guys about last year. Now, as the snow melts, one of the things you're likely to see this year, because of the widespread snow issues, were problems with voles. So this is a fill the soil and get some seed on there. They're not like moles. It's a little bit different. I mean, you can do trapping, but and they're not going back to feed there anymore. They're going to find alternative food sources that are a little more protected. They were out there, of course, underneath the snow, well insulated and protected. And that's why you're seeing some of this. So fairly easy problem to solve. So since we're starting to look down below the soil, let's look at 2-inch soil temperatures this morning, or on the 18th. And it looks like we're just creeping into the low 40s in southern New Jersey. You can see where the heat is building to the south, but still barely cracking the 50-degree mark. So again, just to remind everybody how early we are. Now, one of the things that's fascinating about being able to look at data that Google can accumulate is the ability to look at Google Trends. And one of the search terms I have found to be interesting to teach a lot about how people pay attention to the soil is put in soil into the Google Trends search document, and you'll get the ability to look at how much people searched for the term soil since 2004 on Google. And what you notice is this very interesting heartbeat of interest in the spring in the Northern Hemisphere for the word soil. Look at what happened last year in the pandemic. We're expecting a similar interest in this going forward. We're going to talk more about soil stuff as we keep going during the year, but it's very interesting that how many people will actually Google something with the word soil in it right at this time of year. Now, the other thing they should have been Googling is, what do I do with dead grass along the sidewalk, right? We know this has to do likely with soil, the soil warming right next to the pavement, grass breaking dormancy, late snowfalls that require salt applications, and then widespread death right along the edge of the sidewalk there. And so obviously replanting these areas is a priority in many grounds facilities. Generally it requires a little bit of stirring up the soil. Obviously, these are soil problems as well as plant problems. So trying to fix the soil there, this is not an easy problem to fix. And honestly, what our research would tell you is the later the snowfall, the more you should consider alternative de-icing salts that are more expensive but less injurious to the grass. So one of the ways to prevent this from happening is to try to obviously not drive the tractors and things on the sidewalks, but also switch to a salt that might have less damagement problems to a grass stand than otherwise the rock salt that we typically use. Now, got a question from County Extension Office down in Westchester County. Our new extension person down there, Hillary, taking over for the retired Jerry Giordano, for those of you who didn't know that. And the question was from a local person about picking the right grass seed and what does Cornell have for resources on this? Well, if you go to the Cornell Turfgrass website, you will see a turfgrass species and variety guide. We did it as an iBook many years ago. My longtime colleague, Mary Thurn, did this as an iBook many years ago. And while the variety information in there would be dated, it's about 6 years old. The process of selecting and the information in there is still really very good and very easy to access from a PDF perspective. Now, if you look at, we have simple charts in there, like, you know, if you have more full sun, and higher visual quality, you want obviously maybe more Kentucky bluegrass and perennial ryegrass. You can still have tall fescue in there, but you know, tall fescue moves you into more mowing. It also does better with no irrigation. So there's a good narrative here and a really good table summarizing all the good varieties available. And I'll joke with Rich before we get on there, because you know, one of our goals, Rich, with you is to sell some Rutgers seed, right, brother?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Now, so before we get to talking about Rutgers seed, for those of you that might be thinking, oh, I got to get my pre-crab out. Oh, I got to get my weed and feed out, because you think you might be seeing crabgrass. Let me just remind you that this data pull from the GDD tracker that's maintained at Michigan State University, that's timing of crabgrass germination, which, you know, into the soils get into the 50s. We're not even talking about this. And you can see crabgrass is just beginning to germinate just in North Florida, all the way up into the low country along the coast of South Carolina. Right. So we got a ways yet. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because if you put your pre-emergent herbicide down now, it's going to start to break down. Right. And if you get 12 weeks out of it, you know, do the math. You still are going to have seedlings emerging after the herbicide's broken down. And here's just emergence data from Ontario, Canada, of crabgrass in a lawn. And even though these are degree days and days of the year, you can see calendar days, right? So this is well into the summer, June, early July, right? You're still getting 20, 30% of the crabgrass is still going to germinate, right? And if your pre-emergence product wears out, you know, now you're going to have more problems with crabgrass later on. So we're early yet. Don't go crazy. So since we got Rich here, and what the kinds of things we're going to see, certainly one of the things I've noticed, you know, out at the barn at the farm, Rich, is where I got a shaded barn. I got a pretty good crop of gray snow mold. So you'll definitely see likely snow mold in shaded, low wet areas. But the one thing I actually wanted to chat with you about, because it's been bugging me for a while, is this idea of red thread, Rich. I want to pivot to you here and talk a little bit about red thread issues that, as well as pink snow mold in lawns, is going to start coming on, and what we've noticed about more red thread over the last several years. So why don't we start with chatting about red thread? What are your thoughts about where we're at, you know, in the 20 some odd years you and I have been chatting about this?
Well, red thread, of course, we always kind of consider it one of the first diseases you're going to see because it's got a low temperature. It'll grow from 30 degrees to 85 degrees. So pretty much any time of year, even now, you'll see red thread. If you walk across a ryegrass pasture, you'll find some. It's a disease that it's not real virulent. It's not like gray leaf spot. It's not going to kill everything, but it's going to flare generally in undermanaged turfgrass areas. Lower input, leaner, fertility wise, and I mean that's the conventional wisdom.
Well, then I'm going to stop you because that's what I was taught by Noel Jackson in Rhode Island, and now I'm seeing high-end lawns with it. I'm seeing it in rough areas on golf courses for sure, but in places that I wouldn't say are necessarily low fertility, and I wouldn't say are necessarily places where we see it a lot and I think over the last few years, this has been one of those lawn diseases that the conditions maybe have persisted longer for it in the spring. And I think it's starting to take out some turf.
Well, I think that you're right about the conditions. We have these longer, warmer seasons with more moisture. Clearly it's been raining like crazy here. But the temperature comes up and you get 50 degrees and it stays that way. And, from 1st of April until the 1st of June with regular rainfall, and you're in the window where the pathogen likes to grow. We always Eric Nelson used to talk about moisture as the on and off switch and temperature as the throttle, and where if we get the temperature within the range that the fungus grows the fastest, you're going to get more damage, regardless of management practice. Mm-hmm. And you're going to get a longer period of damage, which will expose crowns to traffic. And so you may see dead or thinning grass. It's a cumulative effect, but for sure, it's not. I read Noel Jackson's book too. And I used to have Professor Joe Peterson. He used to always tell me, "Fungi don't read the book," and so yeah, I think you'll see it in higher end lawn areas.
Now, in general, much like we would with the snow molds, particularly gray snow mold, where you might see a greater preponderance of it, particularly in low wet areas, shaded areas. Once we get to active growth, Rich, you're not liking treating for these things in lawns. You're liking rake it up, get some seed in there. Let's get some active growth. Let's get some conditions for growth. You're not recommending any fungicides for any of these molds or red threads early in the season on lawns or maybe on high end estate grounds or maybe fronts of buildings. Anywhere you'd recommend an early season fungicide?
Once the snow melts, the gray snow mold's done.
Yeah.
Right. And so generally that's a pathogen that's going to blight leaves, and the crowns are going to survive, and raking it up and maybe a little end to push it into growth. Once we get into that growth potential, it'll disappear like it wasn't even there. In most landscape turf, I'm not that concerned about it. I mean, clearly down in Westchester, in Scarsdale, there's people that have to have perfection. But most of us don't need perfection, and if you don't need it, we're seeing that we're seeing some winter damage too. And I got some direct Twitter messages today of lawns with pink snow mold, which I almost never see. Now, pink is in a home lawn. It's got a worse prognosis. You're going to see some death, but I still think seeding and just recovering that way as opposed to a fungicide is the way to go.
And pink snow mold certainly is going to go sniffing out the ryegrass pretty quickly, right? I mean, any ryegrass and POA you have in there is going to get found by the pink snow mold. Wouldn't you think that's where it's going to start?
Yeah, and it's more susceptible, and that's a mobile fungus. It makes a bazillion spores and it moves around, and so it's gonna move, and it'll stay active. Yesterday, we had 24 hours of rainfall, and it was 45 degrees, perfect conditions for it. So if I'm a golf course superintendent, I might have saw that coming and made a fungicide application, on my putting greens. But in the home lawn, most people don't notice, and it is what it is. It'll continue to flare up under those conditions.
And so what about another foliar problem, leaf spot? Before we go underground, I want to talk about roots. We're going to talk about aeration and some lawn root challenges. But let's start with leaf spot. Leaf spot is one of those things that, again, once the temperatures start getting above 50, if we stay wet, particularly you guys, you're going to continue to see leaf spots. Or if we really outgrown leaf spot as a problem because most of our varieties now are resistant to it.
Well, that's a great question. The fungus makes spores now, and you're going to see it reproducing on thatch, into April before it starts to get into the leaves and starting to cause spots. Most of the newer varieties have some degree of resistance in them. I mean, they've been breeding for leaf spot resistance since like 1965.
Yeah.
As long as we've been alive,
Yeah.
And but I still get sod growers who are growing tall fescue sod and blending a little Kentucky bluegrass in and going with cheap old varieties. And so we most of the time I get it from those guys or in sod, recently installed sod.
Yeah.
So it's still out there. It's not as big a concern as it used to be, put it that way.
All right, good. So we always want to make sure we plug a little bit of Rutgers seed while we're here, while we got you. And certainly there's a lot of seeding going on at this time. And again, this is a time to get some seed down to outcompete the weeds. And at the same time, if you see if you have chronic problems, particularly with diseases, Rich, I mean, we have so many better varieties than we just did even 5 to 7 years ago. Obviously, you want to believe continuing to introduce new genetics in any thinning areas is the key.
I'm all off. That's 100% correct. And if you talk to Bill Meyer, Dr. Meyer will say that the best varieties this year are way down the list in 5 years. It takes about 5 years to improve. And it's been ongoing since the 1950s in ryegrass. And we have some really good new scientists working in the tall fescues. So for ryegrasses and tall fescues, we're running way ahead of the path. And, spend a little bit more money for a newer, improved variety, and you get what you pay for.
Well, and furthermore, the wind out of the West with the seed industry is that ryegrass production is going to be down, ryegrass seeds going up, which, you visit the guys who overseed the golf courses in the desert, and then they all start getting nervous with the amount of seed those people buy. A little bit of a price increase is going to hit everybody. But listen, Rich, let's get to the soil, because obviously a lot of annual bluegrass gets into lawns. If the soils are tight, these kinds of lawns can be prone to summer patch. They might be prone to fairy ring. Historically, on a golf course, we had this conversation the other day about it with regard to getting it down, getting it in. Let's start first with how often do you see significant summer patch problems on lawns? And when you do, what do you think it's about?
We see a fair amount of summer patch in lawns. The lawn and landscape professionals that use our laboratory are generally working in higher end properties. Northwest Jersey, it's one of the richest places in the country. So there's a lot of really high end bluegrass, and so we get summer patch in there. And in those situations, we try to work with them on an integrated program of cultural adjustments. Soil pH matters a lot with summer patch. You want to get down to about 5.5. Compacted soils matter a lot, even in moderately or low compaction sites. Core aerification improves the situation. as long as you're doing it at the right time of year. There's some contradiction in the airification, but I think it was basically because the trials were done late. Guys are airfy. If you airfy early and you can recover some roots and some growth, it's a benefit. That's right. We also think about height of cut. We want you up 2.5 inches, 3 inches, rather than if you're below 2 inches, it increases the disease. So if and then lastly, there are varieties that tolerate it better. So if you got to have bluegrass, you can overseed some of those thin spots, and no homeowner can tell the difference between bluegrass and ryegrass or tall fescue. And so if you can get the same leaf, and the same kind of color, just overseed it in ryegrass. Problem solved. Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's so interesting to hear you say that, because there are so many bluegrass varieties. It's harder to change things in the bluegrasses, but I always like the integrated approach. Number one, if you're having chronic problems, it's got to be related to something in your soil. These root pathogens are definitely soil related. So obviously getting after those problems. Now, that said, I think there's a broader conversation to be had about, do we need to airify lawns that don't have problems? What do we need? Because first off, when you're airifying a lawn, it's not like airifying a putting green where you're getting it on 1 inch, 3/4 inch tines on 1/2 inch spacings, Rich, where you turn the damn thing into Swiss cheese. You see the average, grounds or lawn aerator, it's making a hole every 4 inches, and then lucky you get down 2 inches. Maybe it depends how wet it is.
You're being kind.
Right. But I'm thinking about, even if you got the jackrabbit that's driving it in vertically, which is the one, we like, you're still not making a lot of holes. And I'm wondering, is there value in this, or is it just something we've concocted to be able to sell a service? And I often think we're also burping the soil. So, gases are going off, you're burning an engine, you're making it look like something if you don't need to. I think it's important that there are things that are indicators of this: weed growth, summer patch. I don't know, fairy ring. Where do you put lawn fairy ring in this discussion? Some people get those issues.
Yeah, I mean, for fairy ring, the greater point is, I agree. There's no reason in the lawn and landscape to core if you don't need to, if you're not trying to fix something, and largely because the technique is poor. The equipment is not the same. We have to fill the holes with sand or compost or something to make it long term. Yeah. And most people can't afford or aren't willing to go there. No. And so, but if you have summer patch or compaction or lots of thatch, maybe that's a place that if you can do it right. With fairy rings, the biggest issue is the soil becoming hydrophobic. And if you have them and you need to do something about it because you're losing grass, you need to core very aggressively, and then maybe use wetting agents to try, and which wetting agents I don't really see used in lawn and landscape. It's something that maybe could be adopted,
And digging the soil out's not a solution either, right?
No, you see great pictures. I got great pictures of guys who dug out the fairy ring, and then it's like 2 feet away. The next year it's back, and they dug it out again, and it's 2 feet away, it's back. That's right. Just, you just
That's perfect. People digging holes. It reminds me of the conversation in Nick Menchek and the soil sifters from across the street. Carl, we're close to the witching hour. We got any questions?
Yeah, we got one question from Sean. He was asking, it sounds like what we're talking about today, Rich, you're maybe more concerned about pink snow mold than gray snow mold. He was thinking, the opposite, that usually we consider gray snow mold to be more deadly than pink snow mold. Is that because, Rich, you were kind of saying pink snow mold just has a longer period of time it can grow and reproduce in the spring?
Yeah. Well, pink snow mold has a lot wider temperature range where it's going to grow, right? So you'll see it in late May, even in shady spots. And so that's something. The other thing too, in lawn landscape, it's usually gray. It's not usually pink. It's kind of unusual to see it. And so maybe that's why, you got a lot of snow cover and you got some gray snow mold and a lot of winter kill too. Mm-hmm. The impression is that it's worse. But it's a less virulent pathogen,
But once the snow goes away, the gray snow mold doesn't keep growing. That's the problem with pink snow mold. The damn thing just keeps, if it's raining at 45 degrees, it'll just keep growing and growing and growing. And worse yet, if you go mowing and raking things along it, you're going to start streaking it all over the lawn as well.
Yeah.
All right, Carl, another question?
Dave Chinnery was asking if people should dig out their soil for summer patch. It sounds like that's probably not a technique we should do for anything.
No, we want to get along. We just want to get along with summer patch. It's coexist.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Rich, thanks a lot for taking the time. Really appreciate you doing 2 days in a row. And we'll probably be talking to you next Thursday for the conference call that we'll start doing amongst our Thursday morning gang. Carl, take us out of here.
Yep. Again, for Rich, Buckley, Frank Rossi, thanks guys for joining us today. Fourth episode, Cornell Turf Show, fastest 30 minutes in turf in the books. Thanks all to the live audience. We'll see you guys next week, same time, same place.
Thanks a lot, guys. See ya.
Thank you, guys.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.